Okay, now we enter part 3 on this. I already uploaded the other parts and I saw the end of the other one was cut off, and I really just went to the next slide after this and then set up in the left hand corner. But here we had that problem again, an issue, and that ticked me off, and I waited a day. And surely I had lined up a whole train of thought coming off of this currently at that point, and a few rabbit holes and other paths that make connections, but we're just going to go back at this raw. Sometimes in doing so, you have these thoughts that run through your mind. You try to put it back together where you were at. And I had this one that's kind of sad to think about, but in a modern day, with all these modern narratives that we have, how science is so advanced and we've found out so many things, but yet, because of the narrative, most people don't get to ever find out about them, and they still believe a narrative that they were taught perhaps in school, like in my age, over 40 years ago, believing things in the way that people thought about them then. And there's been so many advances since then and before them that wouldn't come to light also, that there's a total different look on the way things went down. And almost from people living like Fred Flintstone or worse, just below 3500 BC, comes to find all kinds of thoughts, findings that show you that, man, they had bread way back here at over 30,000 years ago. They had this, they had that. It pushes back time dates of things like that, but it's not kept and put into scholarship and things like that. I remember talking to a teacher about this one time, that we knew all kinds of things that make some of this obsolete, what she had to teach us. And so it seems kind of, what's up with that? Well, they can't just, these are expensive books, and they can't just make them every year and all these things coming out. In fact, there's supposed to be one of the books that we had for her class is coming out. They've been working on it for years, a couple of years now, and it's going to come out, but you'll never get it. But hopefully it'll have some of that stuff in there that we already know. And I was like, y'all get Xerox copies and stuff all the time. Why can't there be some type of academia where you've got these extra things to throw all in and stuff? And didn't really want to talk about that aspect, about how easy it would be to change a curriculum like that by pulling out something like that. Ran into that in college and stuff too. And like I've said a long time ago, I've learned so much more from academics that specialize and went down one little rabbit hole or another that I wasn't even aware existed whenever I was in school, because I wasn't taught that that rabbit hole even existed. A lot of this goes with the religion and so on, and an echo that's dying off of the idea that people were trying to fit everything under a religious timeline, and if it didn't, then they go ambiguous, or any date that's ended up showing far outreaching of what the paradigm was at the time was thrown out pretty much, which I've shown at least in a few videos, that in a modern day, well, they just had that in the museum, so they decided to take another look at it, and lo and behold, here's 28,000, and that's really within a few, and the gradient is within a few thousand years of what they were saying originally and got thrown away supposedly. But here we have also, it's within a couple of thousand years in the gradient, and it's a little older than even it says now. Isn't that amazing? But hold on, that does correlate with this table that shows you the way we used to look at carbon dating and archaic dates and the way we look at it now. There's a slight twist to that on the way that it works, and the numbers that you would get, and that falls in line too. And then here we go again. Nobody's going to show that, though. Nobody's going to show any of that. For this generation or what? Well, I don't know. If they can get enough of a narrative going on in another different variation, you may not ever hear about it really, unless you're actually specializing in something right down that rabbit hole. Which people aren't supposed to live their life trying to learn the history of the world or anything like that. But wouldn't it be so nice if National Geographic was what they used to be, or there was a program that was really like that, where they would turn around and try to show you these things all the time? it'd probably be a little less interesting than these alien, mermaid, Bigfoot shows that go on. I love watching those too, guys. I really do. I mean, I'm like, okay, so how did they think that this ever existed or this happened? Or how are you putting two and two together? Can I put that in that elf on the shelf box that I talk about? Well, here's something that talks about aliens, kind of, and it's just enough that if you want to put that under an ideal, you can get it going on. So I set all that stuff aside, though I don't try to utilize it in there. But hey, every once in a while I throw a popcorn out of the bag there or something, and I'll go, hey, here's a correlation that shows that the God of the Bible could have been a dragon. I think if I would have shown you that 2 years ago, whenever I did the heavy work on dragons, that would have been over the top too much. But I think after giving you time to digest all that and what that actually incurs and all the people that had it going on and stuff, that you see this situation go again, you're like, okay, I see what you're saying. Hold on, it gets worse. Hold on, check this out too. And I'm not reading anything that anybody else does. Here's what it says. Here's this high symbology. Here's the only idol they ever had out, and it apparently goes with a winged serpent type idea. Fiery winged serpent. Where's this all come from? Who are these people that used to have this ideology going way back and into the last ice age and past, that other researchers are showing they had these fables and things that went along with cattle and everything, and then before that they already had this thing going on with creatures that probably hooked up to them finding a dinosaur head and going, oh my God, you know what this is? And I hope they don't find us. Well, they never found it, but they started making some type of mythology about it. It's how griffins came about and so on too. But that's a type of dragon too, if you twist it in a little story. But I don't want to go off in left field. When I went down a rabbit hole there, but if you'll notice, if you come out here, we end up right here in time, where certain articles have been shown here recently, and a few of them I showed independently and tried to talk my way through the connectives that showed you this shows you this shows you this, and therefore, you know. And nowadays I see people giving dissertations like these slideshows were taken from, where it literally is a guy saying, yeah, even more so, even worse. Whereas I'm sure what I was saying, I didn't say it eloquently enough or show enough there in it, because I'm not trying to do a depth research about the one thing the way this guy did on his master's and his dissertation. But inevitably, 2 and 2 equals 4, huh? And then now there's a wiki article on it. We've seen that a few times, even recently a few times. And so things are a-changing, but there's a wiki article and you can find it if you're looking for it, but is it readily known? And is it thrown out there to where people say, this isn't the timeline, so you have to figure this in? No. How many of these things are there? There's an abundance, but all of which kind of go against the narrative that they were trying to push. Who's we? I thought we were going for truth about everything, and as we find out more and more, well, there's still this tugging on this religion situation where they thought 6,000 years ago, and and da-da-da. So, oh yeah, we're way past that. Who are all these science Caucasians? The same ones that made up the whole thing way back when have turned around and found out the reality of the world. I mean, if you study through the way the Greeks found it out and everything and all went through, and everybody had a piece of the puzzles that we together now either refound, or certain people knew that had to keep it away from a religion for a long time in the dark ages, and things that I don't want to talk about because it starts to get real personal. So this finding here at this Apodema cave, this is something there in the Levant type of area. You'd say the eastern shore, just out of Egypt, rounding around till Asia Minor and Anatolia, that's just right there in that crest, where we think of later people living, known as the Phoenicians and Canaanites, who became the people of the Bible idea and stuff we went into, the New Testament, all that type of idea. But we're looking at something that dates back way before it, and a concept here that's a little strange to totally get into, but the range of Neanderthals and the range of early Homo sapiens, and then of course the range that eventually we have with Cro-Magnon man and so on, which shows you a lot of things that in a narrative that we had before about how things went somewhat linear, and you get taught in school as a chart that runs up this way, didn't run that way. But the scientists that were the Caucasians here that were trying to figure out how it all went for them were trying to put it all together, but then there were anomalies all over the place and things didn't make sense. Stuff was out of time and all that stuff, but they wanted it to look so linear that they've actually cramped science and towards this endeavor for generation after generation now, people, because for some reason when science talks about everything else and has figured out rocket fuel and everything else, all the intricacies of it, even every species on the planet, down to what makes each other just slightly different, and really bisecting it all up, whenever we try to look at humanity, everybody tries to throw it in one little box, and it doesn't actually fit that way at all. And then there are narratives that some people thought that right about the time of Noah is the first time anybody ever built a boat. And I remember there's narratives that said that was the very first boat and everything. And people just knew all these things were untrue, but it was narratives that had to be beat for some reason and taken back to the reality of the way it really was. And we find boating going back tens of thousands of years, and that's one of those things that doesn't really get taught. And I'm sure kids still in elementary school get taught that they thought they were going to fall off the flat earth and stuff, whereas that's not true at all either. It's a great little story to tell kids, but don't say that's the way it was and that's the way people thought it was. You can make it into a little story or a cartoon or something, but let's not be telling our kids lies that were lies at the time, and narratives that were taken at the time that we can actually turn around as kids later on and find out, nah, you didn't tell me all this. And then find out in high school and through the end of that or college that maybe they didn't, what's up with all this? I thought it was all da 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 da, it's got a little rhyme with it, and it's totally different than what you were trying to portray to me almost. Not to harp on how science seems to, whenever it's about humanity, if you will, and social sciences, anything along that line, has totally changed from even whenever I was a kid. And from what I understand, that was a total change just from a generation or two before, and another one and another one. And the big narrative here is all, oh, it's all racist. And you'll find that down here in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see some people, the University of American School of Classic Studies at Athens, Natural History Museum, Griffith University, along with all these people, and Sheboygan, who have gotten together with this. But it's almost like we have to piggyback like that, and these people that were on top of it, figuring it all out before, because of the narrative, it gets shunned. And even though we've made computers and everything else and just forego it, what point are we at on this? Well, once we went down the rabbit holes on this, everybody wants to neglect it. They don't want to talk about it. Why? Well, because it doesn't fit the narrative. Reality doesn't fit the narrative? I don't know, that sounds confusing to me. Tell me what you're saying. Well, you know, that chart and everything and da-da-da. Well, that doesn't fit for anybody really, except for one people. In fact, a lot of that was wrong too, and we've got it more figured out now. But we're still not going to fix that. Why would you do something like that? Well, it's because of a narrative. Listen, I don't want to get off in conspiracy crap or whatever. It's just more of a like, I don't want to talk about it or whatever way you want to look at it. But because of the modern narrative, and you look at reality of things, they don't want to talk about it. Although you can find wiki pages on a lot of this that I've shown too, just like earlier in the show, and even archaeologists that have made this whole assumption. But as long as you don't say a few words and attach it totally, maybe somebody can make the deduction out of it and everything. Well, why can't you talk about it straightforward? That thing with Chris Stringer, I think, is just about as straightforward as you can get. But it's almost like you got to be paying attention there. But see, that doesn't fit the narrative totally. In fact, he's showing you that Homo erectus types, which were much more below the top one of these two picture sets here, which is a Neanderthal type, and then there's the modern human that's down here at Apodema 1. So whenever they found these, the time cycle goes out of it, and they've turned around and twisted this into an idea that, well, there was people that came out, but they must have failed somehow because we haven't found the archaeological record yet. Well, you wouldn't say that about whales whenever you're showing well, we haven't found the one in between right here and here, but then on humans we have to have this idea that they failed, as opposed to the idea of, well, we don't know where they went. I remember getting in deep with one of these archaeologists one time and everything, and that was fantastic. And really appreciated the guy going through it with like what they, I knew the guy was an academic type, so it was fun. But at the same time, when we got to this, well, where does Neanderthals come from, and this, that, and the other and stuff, and then, hey, maybe that's one of those not failed out, but how could it be out whenever nobody ever in Africa ever got a Neanderthal, and now we know that's from admix from coming back in. That's a reoccurrence going back in. Caucasoids leaving, Caucasoids coming back in with some Neanderthal, and they get a little bit, just a small fraction off of that. A percentage which pretty much fits the ideal and everything, and then geneticists now can tell when something happened basically off of it, and they're in concurrence with ideals that go along with it, and then archaeological studies which show the skulls and things like that, and it didn't really happen like we've told you all your life that happened. Well, when would you learn this? Well, did you take archaeology in a college course after the point with a non-woke teacher that is at least going to show you an example of what's going on like Chris Stringer did? Man, that's a finite question there, and no. Well, then you didn't know any of this. You were taught to believe this. So then you get these ideals believing all like this, whenever it didn't even happen like that. And you have had to have taken something in advanced courses and go down a rabbit hole to find out. I'm a real curious kid who's grown up now, and my whole life I've been trying to find out why. Why was this? Why was that? Why did this happen? Why did they think that? Whatever happened that made people think this? What was, and some of it went to the Wayback Machines and stuff and all this other. And then I come to find out what I learned there was just scratching the surface, and it went deeper and deeper and deeper. And here I am at 17 minutes in, and I haven't got off this picture or even finished talking about it. This is really partially probably a talk that I wanted to have about something else that really wasn't about a subject like we're having now, because that's a break in this concept, and it's showing you that there's a lot more even to this than I'm going to be able to show you today in certain little finds. And I tried to show a few of these situations here recently in separate videos and then put my additions onto it and everything, and I always tell you there's another layer to that onion that's there, and things that I don't mention because it's so willy-nilly on the fence in my own mind. I just probably shouldn't mention it. Other ones that I go, this looks like it has a connective. Am I hanging my hat on all of it? No, but anyhow, let's go ahead and get into this. For what we're really talking about here is the fact that there are people who apparently, with no other way about it, unless they could fly, we're going to archaic islands that we know have been always an island. Some of these more than or equal to 26 miles away. It's not something that's swimmable. The habitation on it shows you that it goes farther than that. There's multiple humanoid species that go on there. In fact, at Apodema Cave, it shows something that's there, which is connective kind of to the idea of what we were looking at here. But it's in this guy's dissertation and his connectives, and I'll use it to help me continue down my path and my rabbit holes and the other one that I got here, and we'll go back and forth and try to finish this off. Thank you for staying with me through that. So what we're seeing here is Apodema 2 and Apodema 1. Apodema 2 at the top is actually Neanderthals, and the one at the bottom is a modern human. Problem is with this is it sets them at about 210 to 230,000 years ago. And so that gives an odd reflection, but also here, right there outside in this idea that we have here, they're meeting Neanderthals. And so Neanderthals had an out, but never had a back in, but we're right there at it. And the people that were going in and out were right there at it too. There's been dissertations given, ideas, a lot of presentations giving on this Neanderthal fortress that was up above the Mediterranean in Europe. And so Cro-Mag or whatever went around in the middle area and then ended up swamping over and so on like that. And a lot of these can just be dismissed as conjecture of ideas. Other ones, you find things like El Greco and somebody that looks like Lucy. That's a whole lot more humanoid than Lucy is at 800,000 BC or earlier, already up in that European idea. And how could that get there? And someone will write it off as saying that something that, well, it got going real good and apparently better than the others that are around, but it didn't make it. But we want to go with that Africa idea. That 3 foot tall thing that's a low brain hominid and say we all came from that. And it's almost a point of really? Okay, well, here's another find that shows the same thing that we called Oranopithecus. And so it's like in that same thing. And it dates to similar dating too. And it's been found in a similar area too. How about that? It's not the narrative. Well, here it is. Almost like you should hang it. Everybody gets a copy of it, 3D, so it looks just like it, and they hang it right in front of these people trying to give a talk. So it's like, well, here's using CT scanning, virtual reconstruction, detailed description to measurements, comparative 3D shape analysis, new U-series dates, collaborating between all of these places, they figured out that this dates over 230,000 years and the other one dates to about 160. So this one was there before that one. That's just one of the showings that go on here off of it, but the implications that go on with showing this is early dispersal of sapiens out of Africa occurred much earlier and reached farther than previously thought. Now, I don't know what you're thinking right now, but the narrative now, and they've pushed it back, is around 60, 70,000, right? No, that's not true. It's gone over 100,000, and they've shown things like that, but you never get to learn that part of it because you didn't take the special rabbit hole class with a person that knew that was willing to say it, as if it was conjecture and not peer-reviewed and everybody agrees upon it. But then if it's all like that, why isn't everybody, yeah, whatever? This shows you that people were reaching Europe by 150,000 years earlier than previously suspected. There are multiple sites that are correlating with this data. So here's the thing. If we apply this small amount that gets shown here and the fact that it shatters your out of Africa theory that you have going on, you'd have to rewrite it. If we took and re-looked at everything, like using Chris Stringer's concepts and everything there, and had to show a difference of the way it came out of there, it would ruin everything, and they don't like that. I don't have to make new books or something. Somebody explain it down in the comments why they think that this would be in, and everybody give your own. It doesn't matter. You could tell me it's because aliens are telling them not to do it or anything. I'm willing to go with any of it here at this point. Why that somebody would be this neglectful Well, it seems to be for a narrative. Well, the narrative, whenever they tried to put it in place, was already totally shattered, so they made a false narrative. This is kind of like the Bible, where they knew the earth was round already before they wrote the thing where it wasn't, and nowadays we know for sure that's not. So this whole idea and everything, and do you think the earth is only 6,000 years old? Or, I mean, um, okay, enough about that, but this idea and showing this concept of 150,000 years earlier allows for Neanderthals to have come out somehow and then bred with something that was, hold on a minute, already out, that became non-extant, died off, and their evolution from that point allowed them to be so radically different that that's why we can easily detect Neanderthals as being different than other humanoids, which were conspecifics at the time and right there with each other, and of a similar, or at least somewhat close, value, but yet radically different. And it also, though, would just totally shatter the idea of the out of Africa theory at all. And they would say, well, before we could even say that we were in the modern human concept, or even a humanoid concept, or something that would really be strictly homo, they were all over the place. Therefore, it came out of that. And sure, a large strain came out of Africa. All these things happened and so on off of it at a much later date. But what even led to them in the first place? Hey, here's one. One guy's got an idea that, well, that way before out of Africa that happened in the thing, and that some of those came back in and mingled, and that led to the thing that led to the thing. And, maybe sometimes it's just in presentation and the way people say it and don't go thing like I just did, and you end up being able to get an idea of what they're saying, and it looks like, well, that's at least very feasible, especially giving this information that nobody is willing to talk about because of a shattered narrative from generations ago. Hello. But it does fit well with the evidence from Levant showing sapiens out at 180,000 BC in that cave there that we were just looking at too. So 230, 210 at another site, by the way, 180. Oh, this isn't. No, this is what we go. Well, there's something that's older. It's almost like when they found Göbekli Tepe, when everybody's going, well, they call it the Neolithic, but it doesn't look like there's much stonework here. Well, here's stone bowls made perfectly and stuff, and then here's this thing that looks like Stonehenge. Only it's over 10,000 years old. In fact, there's 50 of them at this one site, and it's the largest archaeological site known to man. But wait, you see that bump in that hill over there? There's one too, and here's one, and what's over there? What's under that hill there? Oh my God, there's archaeological sites that are now all of a sudden popping up. And we're so lucky that they actually buried them. There was a theory there for a moment that they didn't bury the sites, that it happened from a landslide, even maybe an earthquake and stuff, and then the way they looked at the way it layered out, they go, you can get a partial off of that idea, but it would never have turned into what we're looking at. This was personally buried. In fact, all these other sites, they don't even have that possible avalanche situation going on with it at all, and yet they have the same thing going on. So we're going to say, no. But let's go back much further than 10,000 BC in the last ice age, and these people that were making stonework and stuff at that time. After this incredible event that killed off a lot of flora and fauna and so on that they were witness to. But it fits that 180K, and with the genetic evidence suggesting an ancient interbreeding event, was all this a failed dispersal? If so, why would you call this a failed dispersal whenever it looks like that's what happened and that's where it comes from? In fact, we can't get the genetics of these guys. It's gone far past. The oldest ones we're really getting is like Cro-Magnon, but it's at 29,000 BC, and it's actually still here today with that haplogroup and not changes and so on. So that kind of ruins the idea of this changing because I was in less sunlight somehow. And God, I don't want to go off in left field in that rabbit hole. The broader eastern Mediterranean region might be considered a contact zone between Neanderthals and modern humans. And here we go with that idea again that there could be a mix going on at a certain location, and that this might have been one of the mixing points. But the thing that really ruins this and screws it all up, and there makes no sense in the concept here, is why would they be right there in the Levant, literally a day's walk or two, and they hit the Nile and then we're in, and have never gone into Africa if this was the case? Is this it's the farthest reaching point of Neanderthals. They got right there, like at the finish line, and then, to be able to finish saying the whole world got your genetics somehow. But it didn't quite happen that way. But somebody else took the flag from you and carried it on, and that's why sub-Saharans and all the people in Africa ended up having it. But there's a huge mix and backflow, and everything goes all in North Africa, and everybody's pretty much the same in and out off of that. It's the people that weren't involved in any of this that didn't have any of that admix that they only got in a much later point, let's just say. So Epidema 2 belongs to the Neanderthal lineage, as we're looking at the skulls there, and it fits expectations of Neanderthal evolution. It kind of fits under the idea, but Epidema 1 doesn't, and it possesses combination of ancestral and modern human features, plots with craniometry, and is classified with sapiens, and also closest in overall shape to modern human individuals. And if you were looking at the pictures that were there, you can definitely see a larger forehead, top cranial rise that's there versus the top picture we were looking at where Neanderthal had a huge brain, but it was widened out, a lower forehead, and those type of situations. And scientists have come to conclusion and agreed all upon this, only the dating here doesn't give a correctness. And amazing, what was done here was this guy, well, not the one I'm on right now, but the other one was a dissertation where it shows the guy with what he's taught in school thought he was putting out something brand new, but he's showing you information that they already knew, but they weren't teaching him. There's a statement that he says during it. It comes along like that. I don't want to go through the point and go, look at what he says right here. But let's continue here. Two populations living in what is now southern Greece in the Middle Pleistocene and early Homo sapiens circa 210K, followed by Neanderthal group at 170K. Well, here's sapiens before Neanderthal. How does that work? You see, if we were to take one specimen, one situation, you could easily say it like that, like, oh, Neanderthals came later, huh? But all the pictures we find show something that's different. Well, hey, I'm going to screw up the whole narrative here. Not only at 200,000 years do we have Eastern and North African Caucasians that are a modern human that was there, but no, we've got now 325,000-year-old modern Homo sapiens, showed you a picture of it earlier, that are actually in North Africa, and probably not just at one little site there, but all across North Africa and then through the islands that were there inside of Africa, by the way, where we see the Sahara now, and all these inlets, people that were very aquatic, and some of those people were able to just swim across the Nile and go across there, and all these ideas that they have there. And that's just a hard belief thing. And you go, hold on a second. Let's go back to the premise of this whole thing here. These people all over on islands that have always been islands, and you can't swim across the Nile, or even get in the delta and make hippity hop across places that really aren't rushing water or anything like that. In your mind, you just somehow want to put it as a barrier, but yet here we have people that are boating. So what about they skip that whole situation and they go zigzagging or across the coastlines and hoppity hoppity hop? Well, this isn't hoppity hoppity hop. This is I went out that way 26 miles. And it was successful. At more than one time, but also it's showing you they're Neanderthals and then Homo sapiens. Now, this is, of course, epidemic cave we're looking at here, so it's just another correlation data of things that were going on right out here. So what if I'm not on the shore, and so on like that. So according to Lacruz et al. And others, in 2019, the human modern face is distinct from that of earlier hominid species altogether in several important ways, including it is relatively small and non-projecting, so it doesn't have prognathism, is what you would say, or a more simian or ape-like appearance, which I got taught in school was supposed to go along with agriculture. But then you look at all the skulls that were conspecifics at the time, and there was these one people that had lost that altogether. In fact, Neanderthals, in comparison, show a lack of prognathism, which was like, huh, at one time. But then if you see what's going on all over here, that's, there's different things going on. And that's not the narrative. It's relatively small and non-projecting. It shows a depression, the canine fossa below the orbit, so it's set that way. It lacks the pronounced suborbital structures or below the eye structures and the alveolar and mindfacial prognathism exhibited by MP hominids. So middle Pleistocene type area of hominids. These features do not appear all at once in the fossil record, but crucially elements are already in place among the earliest representatives of the Homo sapien lineage. And this is again La Cruz. He said it back in 2019. After looking at fossils that we had already had for a long period of time, it wasn't like we found a new clutch and came up with this idea. It's people are going back over what we have and the dating on them and going, oh wow, this is not at all what the narrative is, huh? But do you hear any of this? No. Do you hear about Asillar Man or anything that's found before him in that area and what that shows in reality in comparison to other people and what's going on here or toolkits or anything like that? No. You'd have to be deep in archaeology and everything to even find this out, and you'd have to try to go down this rabbit hole, wouldn't you? Pretty much. Hey, I had guys on my videos show up. If you've been with me a couple of years, you'll know it, that because they made mentions a few times. Now whenever I see them, we've made the agreement that I throw them away. But I haven't had either on in the last little bit here that shows up. But in doing so, they were in this field, basically. One kind of, and one the other one was directly onto it. And because he specializes all in that, he doesn't know about all this mythology stuff that went all into things and talk about how it made sense and all that to it. It's kind of crazy, but showing you here is the deep academic, and because his field of study was this one thing, he never knew about any of this other things. But a lot of what I show is from direct academics, and here we go again, where if you never went down that rabbit hole, you'll never know, and what did they teach you, and what did you learn? And I'm guessing that I'm trying to indicate that everybody should learn everything. Well, I'd like for everybody to learn as much as they could in their life. It'd just be fantastic. But if you were taught the right things, the correct things in an easier, linear fashion, it would be much easier to grasp, and you wouldn't have to go through all this bullshit or feel like you're walking on seashells, which we'll talk about here shortly. So skull structures and craniometry and things like that really can help to show you a difference between somebody who has a pronounced brow ridge and one that doesn't. One that has prognathism standing out here as a snout below their mouth, one that doesn't, and so on. And they can tell because more modern has less and less of that in everybody altogether. That's a moderning trait. It just makes sense. But whenever we try to put it on a graph here, it all starts to screw up. If we take a look at the different ones that they have, even just shown in this simple graph, wow, I think that's too bright for y'all to even indicate the difference of because of its contrast. But they show you your Homo sapiens, but then there's other people who don't quite fit under that category and stuff. And then who's hooked up to who with America and Asia and Europe hooked up together? How does that work? Well, at least half the lineage of what made Amerindians up was kind of half the lineage that mixed together and made the Caucasians that we know today, because they've gone back and forth a bunch of times. I guess a recent one everybody should be familiar with is the Anglo-Saxons and Proto-Indo-Europeans and all that came over that we're talking about, that we talk about so much in our other videos. How many times did that play out during history? When I made my little video about cowboys, talked about, hey, here's the guys that have pants, and they have boots, and they have rimmed hats, and they ride horses and have wagons, and the wheels on the wagons look like this, and they went west. I know you're thinking about the Wild West of the Americas, but actually we're going back many thousands of years, and hey, the original cowboys, I think is what I called it. But so there's Neanderthal on the far left that's separated from that, and early Homo sapiens there. But then there's also a connective that they don't have that's hanging down here off the left, and it's saying, well, all these are modern humans we're talking about, and even in North Africa and so on like that. But there's these other people at the same time they're not going to mention or give a date to or anything that are down here that we're going to try to attach like this. And if the picture's in where you can see it, there's a couple little branches going on there, and it's showing that there were still extant Homo erectus type forms that were around whenever 2 or 3 steps of evolution had already been made, and there were people that were much different than that at this time. And so when you look at these different skulls, and they have different shapes, and of course we're looking at everybody on the top row has an expanded brain capacity, and how it lays out here, and you say that it all comes down this run in this early Homo like erectus and stuff, and then somewhere in the middle there's this Neanderthal blue area turned into everybody that's modern on the right here. But Neanderthal didn't have anything to do with a couple of the people over, or one of the people over here on the right hand side, so you shouldn't draw it like that. Is it something like we're for the people in question, or I think I'm talking to Caucasians or everybody else but sub-Saharans, because this is not the way that it goes. In fact, we're still green until very much recent times, so this whole thing's kind of thrown off, and how things changed and went. And I've shown that earlier in the video, so I guess that's not worth going over so much. But these little ideas where they give you these strings and connectives that go on in genetics and things like that, where they go, you can see in one form, here it is, and there's Jebel Irud. There, I do it so you can actually see it. Wow, it got past it. So, back here. So here we have Omo in East Africa, which is totally different than other people. So just to be sure of what I'm telling you, we're not talking about Eskimos, sub-Saharans, people that are over here in the islands, or what becomes Orientals at this point, really. What we're looking at is a blend that comes out of East Africa, and then up, there's that new blue blotch that's on there that shows Jebel Irud that dates over 100,000 years before the other ones that are shown here. And so in this conflux of groups that are here, not everybody is representative, and then they're not representing things that were already out of Africa at this time, that other people got to interbreed with and so on, that left different phenotypes upon people. And these aren't really connected to the other people, or the people that never really left Africa, except for, like, guess, the Caucasians are right around there. But then everybody's had this blocker and this wall that's up, and this concept where they can't have this, and then want to cluster just everybody all together that came out of Africa versus not. But there's not a knot that's on this, because they've got them clustered in those guys because of reassimilation back and forth of early Caucasoids, if you will, with a re-out Neanderthal, if we want to try to give a declination at that point. But there's a whole lot of differences between these skull forms that go on of these different people. Now again, in his dissertation here, he's gone off in left field and I'm going with him. And here we find that Homo sapiens idel 2. Yep, it's the only time that we can't just be regular science and we've got to say, well, everybody's a Homo sapiens, so then here's all these different variations because this is way different than that over there. Well, if we weren't ourselves and we were an alien from off of the island, off of the earth, looking down upon it, and we were to do it, would we be able to utilize their same science that they use for everything else on the planet except for humans and deduct that this is actually just Homo idolatu? And is it a true sapiens? Because if sapiens means this, well, hold on a minute, there's Homo sapiens sapiens. What's that? As we got deeper into it, we realized that the Caucasoids and things like that had this more going on, and this was the more modern form, so this is when everybody was modern. Well, here's the problem with that. There's a lot of people on the planet that don't even have that morphology today, even with admix. So how are you going to fit that into your idea of everybody? Well, they weren't saying everybody. They were talking about one people whenever they gave this model a lot out. You know, it was almost like we'll figure all the intricacies of those out later, where we've got this going on. We seem to be attached to it. It helps drive us a little more to find out the truth. Yet in a modern day, if you gave a presentation like that and you started saying Caucasians or who this was attached to it anyway, you're a bad man. Oh my God, it's just terrible to look at what's going on in the modern day as far as this narrative goes on. That's one of the reasons why there has to be this cluster of Americans and other people in some other country figuring it out and putting it out into a paper that they'll easily be able to get away with it, more than like in America, where people would just try to jump on them and tear down statues and do everything because of reality. Well, why? Well, it's because that reality is so far away from what they get taught due to the narrative that it ruins everything so bad that it makes you feel just freaked out about the whole thing. Well, why are people doing this? Why would you do something like that? Well, it's a narrative. Look, there's a reality and a narrative. If they start to get too far apart and start bisecting so bad, it's going to be real terrible when you find out the truth and reality of it, isn't it? Maybe way back here before the roads split, you need to explain the way things went out. Or maybe the fact that that road split a long time ago between a lot of people, and how things really came out and how they even were just recently, as opposed to some narrative that you're thinking means you whenever these people weren't really talking about you. And in a modern day, it's real ambiguous because they won't label any of these people. You're just left to go, oh, okay, and so you've got to figure it all out. Can't make a mention about it. So this idolata has been found. He's got a projecting midface and alveolar renal prognathism that's been shown here in the front jaw area, almost like a snout. Anterior surface of the zygomatic surface is very oriented. His postcanine fossa, so it's set forward like that. The interior order of the zygomatic joints, the maxilla at 90 degrees. So there are many things that are different. He's steep in his frontal lobe area, I guess, and his conjecture from down the gradient of his prognathism. Brow ridge differentiated into medial and lateral proportions. So there's the way that the brow line is, in fact, is slightly different on him, where it's broken into two different pieces in the way that they fit over the eyebrows and so on. Brow ridge is occipital is open and not flexed, so he's got a different idea on the way that his occipital lobe and his eye and it fits around. And people that are real good at this can look at a skull like this, like say take somebody like Chris Stringer or somebody, or there are thousands, tens of thousands of people that can do this right now. They can just look at a simple skull, and it could be made out of plastic to where it would not differentiate it so much, and you wouldn't know how old it is. Of course, you look at something cracked up like this, and everybody gets an idea, and hand it to them, and they should be able to pretty much pick out these traits and facial things to them. They use it in crime, so they can turn around and go, I just found somebody that got buried a long time ago, but it's a recent human. Somebody killed this person. Let's see what he is, whether he's white or black or Mexican or Oriental, what his age is, or is it a he or a she? What's going on here? And track down and try to figure out what's real about this and the crime. You can use the same thing all the back in archaeology, though, and everything else, and these cranial measurements and everything that I've heard people nowadays want to look, oh, that was racist, that people that had a big brain that had looks like that went around and measured other people to see how different they were. Okay, now you take them in your hand, now you measure me, now you measure you, now you tell me what you think. This is science, this isn't something that's stupid here. In fact, this is the most unstupid thing that we have in humanity. Please don't turn around and try to make a mockery out of it. Or let's try to stop being ambiguous. We're going to have to reach a point here where we lose our ambiguity about all of these situations. You pretty much have to end up having reality in your life and the way things went out. And they weren't all the same for everybody. Everybody has a difference going on, and that's just fine. Believe me, it has to be. Reality has to be fine. So here we have Jebel Arud, and so where he clusters at in his facial landmarks and so on, and they're going, no, this is a modern human, and this is that one that dates, and it's a fully modern face. You wouldn't see him as being very much different. Easily, if there was a bunch of hippie biker guys that all had long hair and this, that, and the other going on, and he was hanging out with them wearing the same biker jackets, you wouldn't think anything weird about him. Just like some of the depictions of Neanderthal that they show, you're like, I saw that dude at Home Depot, I swear. But these Middle Pleistocene hominids here, and it cracks at Shanidar Cave and all these different ones, and they've plotted them out here on this guise, and they go, yeah, that's who it is. And they're really clustered down in the blue cluster here where Cro-Magnon dwells, and is real close to that. In fact, he's closer to that than Shanidar Cave and all these other ones, which are Neanderthals. And so who is it? Well, who is it a pre-proto-human of? Well, this is some of the people that went out of Africa 325,000 years ago, lived in North Africa and went out, and everybody goes out of Africa theory. Well, these appear to be attached to modern humans too, but these are pre-proto